Hey there, Jeff Manchester, Manchester Music. Welcome. In this video, I want to open with a very important message, and that's that I've been wrong. I've been really wrong. You see, for years, people have asked me on this channel as I do speaker reviews or acoustic treatment reviews, Jeff, what do you think about room correction software like Sonarworks or any one of these companies? But that Sonarworks is the one that just keeps coming up. For a long time, when I had my little project studio in Toronto, I had a very small room that I felt was very tightly controlled and sounded pretty good. I put up paneling. I thought I was getting kind of the best results possible. And then I moved into this much larger room, which has a number of complications that prevents me from really doing the best I can with acoustic treatment for reasons we'll get into further into the video. But I've always held this kind of snobby belief that you should do everything you can to fix the sound at the source, and that my knowledge of what sounded good and my acoustic kind of, intellect about like placing panels and first reflections and nulls and modes, I could kind of figure it out on my own. The reason I'm saying I'm wrong is that for a long time I was always saying, I don't think you should rely on room treatment software, correction software that has you, use a microphone and stand in 8,000 different positions. You should get it right at the source. And if you really know what you're doing in a room that that you've treated well, you don't need something like Sonarworks. I have, over the last 2 weeks, been experimenting with the reference ID, Sonarworks reference SoundID. And I will say that it has completely changed my attitude on this subject and really forced me to shove a big piece of humble pie down my throat, because the difference is night and day. And in this video, I'm going to talk about my experience with the software and why anyone, even if they're in a great room or a not so great room, should really consider using a tool like this, because I think I am going forward going to be a real ally and advocate for this kind of room correction technology, as it, I believe, has totally benefited my mixes, masters, composition, all of my music. So I've turned the room around, so to speak, for a couple of reasons. I want you to get a better understanding of the kind of space that I'm dealing with. I did a video a little while ago talking about my room setup where I really show you all four corners of the space. And I think it's a better kind of way for you to get acquainted with the room. But I'm going to point out one major issue that I have with this room, which got me interested in choosing to use this software in the first place. And the focus is trained on my face. But if I move out of the way, hopefully you'll see this giant, boundary right here where the corner of the room lives. There is no way for me to put acoustic treatment there because the door opens from the inside and would kind of get interfered with if I had anything like a big thick corner trap or something there. Now the same is true on the other side of the room too, just take my word for it. You see the big kind of sunflower light there behind me on my left, which might be somewhere else on your screen. That also has a door. It's a storage closet, and it makes it really tough for me to put any speaker treatment there acoustically because of the same door issue. Now, as far as the boundaries go and the first reflections go for the speakers, I've got my focals on my left and my right. Its first reflection point, where the sound first bounces off, is actually a giant window. So I have some pretty thick curtains that are closing that off and helping a little bit with that. And the boundary for this guy over here is, a computer monitor and a little bit of acoustic treatment. I've done the best that I can. In front of me, however, I have a pretty good setup. I have some panels at the top. I have some panels that I'm staring into, and there's some panels on the wall here on the corners. But in the back, that's where bass likes to build up and collect. And I knew that going into this room that it would be a bit of a challenge, but I was very snobby and I said, I'm going to deal with it. It's going to be fine. I'll just get really close to the speakers. I'll position my sweet spot so that it's not going to be interfered too much with the back of the room. This was a total revelation to me when I started to get the SoundID reference in here. I went through the calibration, which basically has you walking around with, again, this microphone over here. There it is, this little guy. Now, again, the focus is on my face, but it's this little guy, and you can probably use your own microphone. You'll just have to check with the documentation to see which one's going to work, because not all of them do, and this one is supposed to be the one that works really well. So I got this one. I went around and I used my Hercules mic stand to just position in all the places that it told me to, which was fun. It took about 30 minutes and terrified my fiance based on, all the weird noises that were shooting around the room. So the reason you go through this entire process is because it needs to collect a big snapshot of how all the sound moves around the room, and it needs to also understand where your sweet spot is for the listening. And after I went through all that process, it basically counteracted the room with its own EQ curve that it imposes, based on everything that it learned through my audio interface. And it imposes that curve to combat all the room modes, nulls, all that stuff. So what I want to show you with my screen here is the calibration on. So this is the curve that it imposed after it learned everything that it did in those very fun 30 minutes. So this green line represents a flat, uncolored, EQ curve. Now, when I take calibration off, this is what horrified me, because what you're going to see is what I was listening to on an EQ curve, how I perceive the sound. This is freaking terrifying, because look at what happens here. At about 100 hertz, I get this huge roll off, and then we go up with a bit of a bump here at, I'm not really sure where, let's just say 50 hertz, and then it rolls all the way down. So my low end is totally off kilter, the way that I'm perceiving it. This is like doing color correction in post for, picture or video, where you make make sure the grass is green and the sky is blue. This is like doing color correction wearing sunglasses, because I am already at a loss. I'm operating from a loss. I don't have an accurate representation of how sound is working in this room. And if you don't have an accurate representation of sound, you can't make informed decisions. So I was very shocked to see, this is how smart I thought I was. This is what I was getting. This is what I was dealing with. So with the calibration enabled, look what happens. It adds boosts where there were nulls and dips. And it adds, a couple of dips where there might have been a bit too much information. Look right around here at, let's say, 2K. It added a bit of a dip there because I had a bit of a notch. So what it does is it imposes that curve, and anything I play back in Pro Tools, Logic, or just listening to Apple Music gets filtered through this EQ curve, and then that gets sent out to me. And of course, you have to make sure that when you're using Sound Reference, either in the DAW as a plugin, which you can make sure it's the last thing for you in your chain, or you can have it kind of parked in your kind of, home base on your desktop. You want to make sure if you're using it in Pro Tools, you disable it before exporting, because that curve is going to be added at the export stage. And of course, for Zoom calls and things like that, it is a bit of a nightmare because I have to route the audio differently. But for critical listening and mixing and composing, it has been a total no-brainer. This has changed everything. I have gone back and listened to records that I loved, and I am hearing them in a completely new way. Now, you might ask, how was I mixing things before? How did I know that I was going down the right path? Well, as you know, I use tonal balance control a lot, which is a visual metering system that just shows you the overall spread of energy. And so you can reference your tracks against a tonal curve from a reference or a bunch of references or a bunch that Isotope, the makers of tonal balance control, have created. So it's not like I was, I had no North Star. I didn't know where I was going. I did. But this to me is still unbelievable. Now, while we're in this interface, I want to show off a couple of kind of cool things. The first is I've got my solo BEs. Those are my speakers. That's what I got my calibration, fit to. But I've also got my Sennheiser HD650s. And this, these are my critical listening headphones that I use all the time. They're getting a little old, but it has a curve for that too. And I do use that a lot when I'm just listening on the wired headphones. If we go back to the Focal here, here's the other cool thing that I think the latest version of SoundID Reference has, and that's the flat target that I came up with based on that kind of onboarding thing. Put the mic here, put the mic there. But there's also a custom target that we can build, and I can create a new one if, let's say, I happen to be of the mind that I don't like what it's done, or I like a little bit of what it's done. I can go in and kind of change it and add a custom curve. Or I can go to translation check, and this offers a number of really helpful presets for simulated environments in which my mix master composition might be played back in. So I have car 1, car 2, car 3, in-ear headphones, AirPods. What do you think this sounds like? And as I go between them, you can see we get different kind of variations of the curve. Laptop, so I can kind of preview on a MacBook MB, I'm assuming stands for MacBook Airy or Professional 15-inch. We see a nice kind of scoop out of the lows, so you can see how your lows kind of survive if they're going to be played back on a MacBook. Smartphone average is right here. Studio speakers, the mix cube, I'm assuming this is the Aventone mix cube, and the NS11. I have the NS10Ms here, so it's helpful to kind of see the distribution of those systems here, just so visually. So I've always kind of wanted to know what the frequency response of the NS10s are. I'm sure you can go find it online, but here they are right here. And of course we can just caret down and go back to our flat target, and this represents the solo BEs. There are another couple of different options here: linear phase, mix, zero latency, and as you mouse over them, they'll tell you why you might want to go for one over another. I calibrated everything to a listening spot, but you can disable that. We have limit controls here, and we have safe headroom. When you add this curve, sometimes you get a big boost in loudness because certain frequencies are being accentuated, which contribute to overall loudness. So you can make sure that you just put a bit of a limiter, if you will, on the overall output so that you don't get a huge jump in level. And this is something you want to make sure that you know about as you're mixing and mastering with SoundID Reference on. You can also go to the right here where you have some output controls. You can swap left and right channels, and you can also sum to mono, which is pretty helpful too. I can mute the output or bring it back in. And there's also a dry wet knob over here. So if I bring this up and down, I can bring in just as much or as little as the curve of the curve as I want to. It's a little bit laggy, honestly, but I always leave it at 100% wet. But if you are someone that really needs that control, you have that there too. Hopefully I have convinced you that even a very stubborn audio engineer that went to audio engineering school can be convinced with this technology. I have to say the onboarding to actually shoot sound across the room and hold the microphone is phenomenal. They did a great job with that. All the documentation, the people over at Sonarworks that kind of helped me get set up, I want to say thanks. And hopefully this has convinced you that, even if you're a stuffy pro, I think you can be swayed. I think they've done some amazing work here. And for everyone that's left the big studios, that's doing work from home, especially over COVID, I mean, it doesn't get any better and easier to use than something like SoundID Reference. Okay, thank you so much for watching. What did you think? Do you have this stuff? Do you think it's reasonably priced? Do you think it's a little bit out of reach price-wise? Do you have a microphone that you prefer instead of the one that they provide? I really want to get your thoughts on this. I know it's a bit of a contentious issue, or perhaps I thought it was a contentious issue, and really the whole world has changed, and I'm the laggard here who's like coming in last on this big transition that people have had as we moved away from the big studios into project and boutique studios at home. And this technology is super ubiquitous, and I'm just, I'm a loser with this stuff. So I really want to know. Thanks as ever for watching. Vodcast Podcaster, if you want to leave me a question, leave a comment. I'm on Instagram as well, and I'll see you on one of those platforms. Take care.